Over decades, Ridgefield's development has been carefully guided thanks in large part to the untold hours of volunteer work by commissioners like you. Ridgefield and the Planning and Zoning Commission have earned their reputations by confronting issues, creating and enforcing regulations, and scrutinizing every application fairly and thoroughly. This includes the Commission's decision in 2015 to ban both medical and recreational marijuana businesses in Ridgefield. You are the beneficiaries and now the stewards of that reputation, to burnish it or to tarnish it. As perfect as Ridgefield is, like all towns, it cannot simply stay the same. It will constantly evolve or devolve, for better or for worse. Its future is in your hands, in the hands of Ridgefield public officials, Ridgefield's duly elected Planning and Zoning Commission. Hartford doesn't make that job any easier. Examples include 830G passed in 1989 and legalizing medical marijuana in 2012. Then Governor Malloy said we don't want Connecticut to follow in the path pursued by other states, which essentially legalizes marijuana to anyone able to find a doctor who will give a prescription counter to federal laws. At that time, Ridgefield's Planning and Zoning Commission passed and then extended a moratorium on medical marijuana, and after working sessions with the first selectman, police chief, director of social services, members of the Coalition Against Substance Abuse, and Ridgefield state representative, passed zoning regulations banning both medical and recreational marijuana in Ridgefield. Here is a sample of the commission's discussion led by then Chairman Rebecca McKetty.
The Commission last discussed the medical marijuana regulation and how to move forward with it on the 4th of November. Out of those discussions, we have a revised regulation at the table that reflects that discussion. So the first page is the history. Down to the bottom, it gives the reasons the Commission has decided to adopt a prohibitive stance on this at this time, and the bullets reflect our discussion. And then the language, 7.13, medical marijuana dispensaries and medical marijuana production facilities, and then note definitions. And then the last page, page 3, reflects the existing regulations so the Commission can compare. Any discussion, comment on this before we go to the public? John?
Well, I think that the Commission, with the exception of Phil and me, were very much in favor of this.
George?
Well, I feel that since Bethel has had such success, and they're only 20 minutes from here, that our citizens are covered. Are we supposed to worry about the citizens of Norwalk, New Canaan, because they have to drive farther and make it more convenient for them? I think that we're doing the right thing.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, my understanding is that there are only 9 permits issued at this time. Is that correct?
I think there were 8 initially, and there were, I think, 3 more after that. So there's as many as, I think, 11.
Okay. And that they're really, the purpose of that was regional distribution centers.
The original language was the federal government considers marijuana to be an illegal drug. And Patrick and I supported the argument that the federal government considers it a Schedule I controlled substance, which is at the heart of my opposition to allowing it in town. And so we agreed to revise the language to reflect that it's a Schedule I, not that it's an illegal drug. We thought we should be more specific.
Okay.
Because the reason that it's a Schedule I is behind the inability to do any kind of clinical tests on it, because the federal government doesn't allow clinical testing of Schedule I drugs. Other comments? Steve?
I think while we don't talk to the record as laws passed in Washington, D.C., where you have a record in terms of what has been said that doesn't go into the law, I thought that our counsel indicated that this was the best direction for us to go.
He did. Additional comments? Okay. Any comment or questions from the public on this issue?
Ultimately, the regulation they passed, which remains in Ridgefield zoning regulations today, prohibited businesses in Ridgefield that that grow and dispense both medical and recreational marijuana. In December of 2015, First Selectman Marconi's official position was very public. The love of the American dollar should not taint what is best for the people of Connecticut and Ridgefield. But with so many states relaxing cannabis regulations and generating taxes from it, Connecticut moved rapidly from decriminalization in 2011 to medical marijuana in 2013 to commercialization and taxation of adult recreational marijuana in 2021. Taking FOMO, the herd instinct, and social phenomena called fear of missing out to a public policy scale that would make a peer-pressured pubescent blush. Hartford signed into law an act regulating the so-called responsible and equitable use of cannabis, but giving its 169 towns the authority to regulate or to outright ban the 14 cannabis businesses the law defined without infringing on the rights of adults to buy, possess, and use legal marijuana. After not one, not two, but 3 public information hearings where the Board of Selectmen exhausted public interest in and input on the topic of permitting local cannabis businesses, both medical and recreational, here is what they decided and why.
Now that I think of it, back into those meetings I had in September, I think it was, they said, we want to hear input from the Board of Selectmen. Again, I kind of took that as probably everyone else did, that, you know, they were saying, okay, it's up to the Board of Selectmen to make the decision.
They
but-
did say that. They
Yeah,
said that the Board of Selectmen is responsible for setting a policy.
Yes.
Right.
And if the Board of Selectmen says no, then that's the policy of the town. I think if the Board of Selectmen establishes a policy with a no vote, they will accept that as meaning the town does not want to move forward. End of issue.
Right. I mean, that's the way I've read it so far.
Yep. And then that gives the opportunity for people to go and petition and raise the 1,700 signatures, whatever the 10% is. I think Wayne said we had 17,000 roughly registered voters now.
I've heard very, and amazingly strong opinions, you know, on sort of both sides, and I was just able to come to one session that we had here on a Saturday morning, which was clearly the larger one, and it was somewhat balanced. I think towards the end there was clearly more of a feeling towards no, but again there were plenty. I think I had 8 people or so who very passionately talked about, you know, the need to have it.
When we first started our Community Coalition Against Alcohol and Substance Abuse, it was after a young man, 21 years old, died of an overdose on Main Street, heroin overdose. And it was a shock. You know, Main Street, Ridgefield, kind of brought a sense of reality to it. We're looking at taking money from something that we've worked so hard to try and keep our kids, especially with alcohol. I mean, the years, and it's still #1 in the schools. Vaping is running a very close second, and we all know that the oils that are out there and the THC content could be crazy. I mean, it's almost an hallucinogenic drug, and you don't want your kids getting behind the wheel with that kind of stuff on the street. And I do think that a store in our community, a dispensary, would certainly allow for a greater presence of it in our town, because what we have found that many of the kids who are at that younger age are getting it from an older sibling. I see that same type of behavior opening up in the community, and I think if we have an opportunity to help stop that we should make every effort to do so. So that's where I'm coming from. Barbara, you wanted to say something?
But in terms of going into the business of it, and having it as a presence on our Main Street when the kids are coming out of school on a Friday afternoon and coming down Main Street, Rudy, you're right. It's everything we fought against.
Why don't we just have the motion be that the Ridgefield Board of Selectmen hereby establishes a policy not to allow any form of cannabis to be legally
Any form of cannabis business, is what you're saying, right?
business to be established in the town of Ridgefield.
That's what they were trying to get to.
How about that?
That's Yeah, no, that's exactly right, business.
So we have a motion, Barbara, seconded by Maureen. If there's no further comment, all in favor? Aye. Barbara?
Aye.
Nays? One nay. Motion carries.
On April 25th, First Selectman Marconi sent the Planning and Zoning Commission a letter conveying the Board of Selectmen's policy decision and reasoning. The following evening, on April 26th, he punctuated that decision with a personal appeal to the Commission, reminding you that you asked for guidance from the Board of Selectmen and briefed the Commission on that guidance in person.
The Planning and Zoning Commission suggested that this is a policy decision that should be debated by the Board of Selectmen and decided there. If we were to say, yes, we want to move forward, we would send it back to P&Z to establish the regulation, location, and all the other variables that would go into that decision. If we said no on the policy, that would establish that decision. It turned out to be pretty interesting. We did hold 3 public hearings. First one, we had 4 people, the second 8, and the third about 22. It was interesting. The majority of people were against. There were some that felt it should go to a referendum. I consulted with counsel on that. And basically, it came down to 3 basic decisions we had to make. And I think Rob sent out the letter I sent that explained that we are not allowed to call a referendum on an opinion question. It would be 14 different areas. We had our discussion. The opinion of the Board of Selectmen was to vote to establish a policy. They would rather not even bother going to a referendum, that we establish a policy at that last meeting, which we voted. The motion was approved 4-1, 4 in favor of a no use policy. 1 person voted against the motion, which was the reason for it. He felt it should have gone to a referendum. And that's what is basically said in this letter here, explaining those 3 different alternatives that we had. And that's where we're at. But the Board of Selectmen voted not establish a regulation for marijuana in any of the uses. So it's a quick overview, but I'm not going to go on and be repetitious relative to a policy, which is what the P&Z Commission is.
In your opinion, does that obviate the need for any kind of action on the part of the Planning and Zoning?
Well, I would say that's a discussion of the Planning and Zoning Commission. However, I would respectfully ask that you take the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen.
To the surprise and consternation of the Board of Selectmen, Planning and Zoning tabled a motion by Mr. Serena and Ms. Constantino.
P&Z referred it back to us for policy. We set the policy. It's not been adhered to. There was a motion put and a second, and they decided to table it. It hasn't come back, and that concerns me. It concerns a majority of the people in this town.
The Commission's failure to act concerned us so much that on June 9th, 6 days prior to the Board of Selectmen's advancing the cannabis ordinance, John Noonan, John Tartaglia, and yours truly, Kirk Carr, decided the time had come to put our money where our mouths are. Our only interest in this regulation is civic, not financial, and this application, as submitted, merely updates an existing, already approved zoning regulation passed by the Commission in 2015 to bring it into compliance with Connecticut's cannabis regulations and with a town policy adopted by the Board of Selectmen and a Ridgeville moratorium that expires on September 24th. Thank you for accepting our application and for belatedly opening this public hearing. When this commission passed zoning regulations prohibiting businesses that traffic in medical and recreational marijuana, it listed 6 reasons that are as valid in 2022 as they were in 2015. to eliminate any chance that an application would be submitted under some other permitted use. Because federal government considers cannabis a Schedule I controlled substance, the state intends to limit licenses to serve regional populations. A licensed facility will be conveniently located within 20 minutes of Ridgefield. The pros and cons are inconclusive, and the experience of other states are contradictory. But in 2021, the state added one cynical new wrinkle to weigh. The state, in a bid to profit handsomely from taxing legal marijuana, has offered crumbs to Connecticut towns in the form of a 3% sales tax. You will soon see that this is chump change that is little more than an embarrassingly contemptuous and insulting bribe. There are basically three groups who think the commission should welcome cannabis to Ridgefield. Those libertarians who believe that the government governs best that governs least and should butt out of adults making such decisions for themselves, no matter the impact on children or the social and economic costs. Those who are enamored with cannabis, either for personal pleasure or commercial profit. And finally, those who see dollar signs as a windfall in taxes and development for Ridgefield. If you are in the first two groups, this presentation is unlikely to change your mind. But if you're in the third group, this presentation is intended to break the spell of the chump change bribe that is being dangled by the state. The commercial opportunity of cannabis can be blinding. The jobs it promises, the storefront it could occupy, the tourism it could attract, the taxes it could generate. But all that glitters is not gold, and all that promise can quickly evaporate into a distant mirage. The Cannabis Industry Association explains why in this excerpted video about an arcane section of the federal tax code, Section 280E, and its dire consequences in their own words.
You've probably heard about the green rush sweeping the nation. Although the cannabis plant is still federally illegal, in the 29 states plus DC where it is legal for adults or medical use, businesses are now legitimately growing it, selling it, and everything in between. You may think these businesses are swimming in profits, but what you may not know is that they're being taxed at an insanely high rate thanks to a little thing called Section 280E of the IRS tax code, making tax season for a cannabis business owner a real bummer. Imagine paying an effective tax rate 3.5 times higher than the business next door to you because you were forbidden from taking normal business deductions, such as payroll, rent, and other common costs of doing business. Cannabis dispensaries and cultivators are paying an effective tax rate of 70% or higher. By comparison, the corporate tax rate established by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 is 21%. The effect of this is that licensed cannabis businesses cannot invest as much in capital improvements or things like employee raises and benefits, hiring more employees, expanding operations, or giving back to the community. The disadvantages are numerous, from high turnover to higher prices, which drives customers back into the criminal market, and criminals don't file tax returns. Cannabis remains a Schedule I controlled substance according to the federal government, so this penalty applies to licensed cannabis businesses that operate in compliance with state laws and regulations. This means real problems for state legal cannabis businesses who are staying compliant while attempting to grow. Meanwhile, it has no effect on illegal operations that don't file tax returns. Well, cannabis businesses can't even deduct many of the costs incurred in staying compliant. To learn more, visit NCIA's website at www.thecannabisindustry.org.
2 points merit emphasis. Confiscatory taxes impair cannabis businesses from doing many good things, including giving back to the community. Lawmakers were naive if they thought legalizing cannabis would end the illegal marijuana trade, including the scourge of fentanyl. This is no exaggeration. How bad is it? Well, it's so bad that California appropriated $100 million to bail out its legal pot business as it struggles to compete with the thriving illegal market. This is how Jared Kylo, proprietor of Higher Path, explains the very challenging economics of the legal cannabis business to NBC.
How much is a pound of marijuana taxed from the grow all the way to your store? Right now, 50% of the price you see on our shelf is taxes.
Where there is a cheaper substitute, customers will gravitate to the cheaper illegal market.
The customer's saying, what is really my risk in going out to the illicit industry? What is my risk? Because right now, really what you're paying for in the legal industry is testing and taxes. And if testing isn't saving my life, why am I paying taxes?
Now to that mix, add the confiscatory federal tax code of Section 280E.
In 2020, we did $11.4 million in retail sales. Before federal taxes, I made $136,000 in profit. After federal taxes, I lost $80,000 as a business.
One doesn't need a degree from Wharton to know this business model is not sustainable. Sooner or later, the legal cannabis business proprietor has to face a stark choice. One road leads to almost certain financial destruction, and the other to survival and maybe to even fortune. Tiffany Devitt, Vice President of the California Cannabis Industry Association, explains how legal cannabis businesses can break bad.
There are companies that are basically playing both sides of the coin and are operating in the regulated market, but then also diverting some of their materials to the illicit market in order to fund their regulated operations.
They are finding it real easy that the only way that they can find profitability and keep their businesses open is by jumping back into having 1 foot in the illegal industry and 1 foot in the legal one, because it's the only place they can kind of fund their own business.
It was naive to think that legalization and confiscatory taxation would eradicate the illicit marijuana business.
Now that there's no barriers to entry and that there's no deterrence when it comes to crime, the cartels are back. And they're back because they know how to operate in this illicit industry. And so they've not only come back to like where they were pre-2018, they've come back stronger because they're growing more here, they're robbing stores and reselling the product back into the illicit market.
Whether legal marijuana businesses gone rogue or drug cartels on steroids, one thing they both have in common: they are much less squeamish about selling to underage customers. The so-called adult recreational cannabis business has zero probability of catering exclusively to people 21 years and older. That illegal market won't vanish because of legal commercialization and is already in Ridgefield's backyard. On June 23rd, News Times reported 3 Danbury smoke shops were busted for illegal marijuana sales. Even so, those local taxes are very tempting. But those crumbs are chump change, as they represent 11 cents on the dollar of state and local taxes. 89 cents go to Hartford, 66 cents of which are in highly regressive excise taxes, and 23% in the state sales tax. But that is just the income side of the equation. The Centennial Institute of Colorado Christian University has documented that the economic and social costs dwarf tax revenues by a factor of 4.5. 89 cents of that dollar goes to Hartford. Only 11 cents remains local, while most of the economic and social costs are borne almost entirely by the community. This may be a net positive for the state, but a major shortchange for the town. And every day we learn of the increasing social cost of youthful access to products with THC levels that are 200% higher than seen just a few decades ago. And the social and economic costs can be high and highly personal. Commissioner Nenji's lived experience can't be ignored.
For me, this is on a personal level, this is a very difficult discussion. Because some of what Rudy shared earlier about research and the effect. It's something that I experienced personally. A younger brother of mine who used marijuana or cannabis essentially got some brain damage. And for years, he hasn't been the same person. And the family essentially had to take care of it. Personally, for me, I would probably say, don't do it. Don't allow it in town.
Guns, which have been widely owned since well before the Bill of Rights was passed in 1791, alone can't explain the surge in mass shootings. Another common denominator that is emerging is the psychotic effects of high-potency cannabis on young males. This June 1st story from the Wall Street Journal connects the dots. Copies are available online. As is the New York Times report from June 23rd about the high-potency product's psychotic and addictive effects. In spite of these dangers, potency is largely unregulated. But even where it is, as in Connecticut, there is no known safe limit. And we don't have the luxury of time to educate parents and kids. John Katz weighs the consequences of high-potency cannabis against the paltry taxes that it might raise.
Marijuana is not the benign, recreational drug that it used to be. And I was somebody who would have used it if I could have, but I didn't. It's a very different drug today, and I think we all ought to familiarize ourselves with just how potent it is, how dangerous it can be, and weigh that against the possible increase in taxes that we might enjoy.
Okay, if taxes don't offset the social and economic costs, what are some of the non-tax benefits? Meg Sanders of Cana Provisions of Massachusetts told the ECDC at their public hearing in August of 2021, don't do it for the taxes, do it for the development opportunities.
Understanding of this isn't just about taxes, this is about jobs. This is about benefiting your town in a lot of ways. I have 112 employees at my Lee dispensary, 112 in a town of 2,500 people. I'm a significant employer, and that has made a big impact in a town that doesn't have a lot of industry.
That impressed Mitch Ancona of Ancona Wines and Liquors, who shared this reaction with the ECDC at their meeting on September 13th.
And I was also amazed on the young lady that spoke about her dispensary in Lee, Massachusetts. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She's got a freaking 100 and some odd people working for her. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I can't get 14 people to work for me. Like, how do you do that? That's crazy.
By the end of the meeting, ECDC Commissioner Sean Dowd raised the issue of the tight labor market's impact on restaurants and the need to import labor from neighboring towns.
There was a restaurant topic. Talking to a couple of different restaurant owners, everybody's struggling with staff, right? So it's not a common thing. One of them asked if there was a way to, to transport, right? So like if there was if there was a way to make it more economically feasible to bring in kind of like bus and wait staff from, if they were coming from Norwalk or, Danbury or something, like where the town would kind of promote some type of commute or kind of bus or transportation or something like that to try to kind of bring staff in like on a daily basis. Has that ever been discussed? Or
the post-pandemic shortage of labor is part of a longer-term trend, compounded by inflation and the surging cost of gas. Between 2005 and 2019, the number of Ridgefield employers increased almost 18%. While jobs increased 3.9%, the labor force lagged just 3.7%. Looking at greater Ridgefield, including Danbury, Reading, and Wilton, the employer numbers increased 15%, while the jobs increased 8%, the labor force lagged, increasing just 7.5%. The demand for labor has outpaced the supply of employees. According to the U.S. Census in 2019, Ridgefield imported 82% of its local labor force from neighboring towns. Fast forward to 2022 and the soaring gas prices and pain at the pump is making commutation prohibitive for all workers, especially minimum and low-wage workers. So recruiting workers is a full-time, never-ending job for Ridgefield businesses. Ridgefield doesn't need more jobs. Right now, it needs more employees. Finding employees, even in Ridgefield, may be the least of a cannabis entrepreneur's headaches. 50% of all new business fail in the first 5 years. Here is Andrew Glassman, chair of Pullman & Conley's Attorneys Cannabis Practice, speaking at the Hartford Business Journal's Cannabis Business Seminar in November of 2021. He explains why the odds for a cannabis entrepreneur are even longer.
And there are risks associated with any initiation of a business. So you have operational risks, you have management risks, and you have industry risks. So if you take all of the basic issues associated with any startup, and then you overlay this particular industry, there are additional minefields. And I've been listening today, both panels, I was a little surprised at some of the information that I was hearing. And what I mean by that is a lack of specificity in the information that we're hearing, a lack of guidance from the state of Connecticut. And I'm not faulting the state of Connecticut, DCP or the SEC. They're learning this process as they go. So as a result, there are no answers to a lot of the questions that people in the audience are asking.
And Patrick Johnson spoke as a cannabis business proprietor about the unanticipated pitfalls that can jump out and bite.
What you want to recognize is when you try to find property, right, first of all, you want to make sure you obviously find a town that will allow you to operate in that town that's going to be zoned and so forth. Secondarily, right, you got to have a landlord that wants to work with a cannabis operator, right? So that probably disqualifies a lot of the properties. Thirdly, which we found out the hard way, and it's something you want to ask early on, is just because the landlord does it, if the landlord doesn't own the building, a lot of times their bank will not allow him to have you as a him or her as a tenant, right? So we thought we had a property. Lo and behold, when we were going to start working on the lease, because we only had an LOI, the landlord's like, my bank's not going to allow us to work together. So on one occasion, we ended up having to buy the building, but in most cases, we couldn't afford doing that, so we had to go find a separate location. So very early on, it cost us 3 months here, 4 months here. So as you go through this, make sure you kind of check all those checkboxes. One of the quotes, my business partner, he's kind of saying, and it's true, he says, I wake up every morning knowing I'm going to get slapped in the face. I don't know by who, and I don't know when, but I know I'm going to slap in the face. And it's true, like there is, I would almost tongue-in-cheek tell you don't get into this business. For me, worked out, but honestly, there was times where it was just miserable.
As painful as those regulations and taxes are for the cannabis business owner, the American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse documents that they are imperative for maximizing tax revenues, illustrating the inherent cannabis business paradox. The practical equivalency to booze argument is a specious and dangerous distraction, as Elizabeth DeSalvo explains.
Hi, Elizabeth DeSalvo, 57 Whitehurst Road. I don't really have, as a grown-up person, I don't care if my grown-up friends smoke pot. It doesn't bother me. I'm not against the sale of marijuana in general equal to alcohol, because I believe, too, it would be more regulated and that would be better. But I don't think we should casually overlook the young people in our life, because I grew up in the 70s. Many of my friends smoked pot at school all day long. And that's the difference between alcohol and marijuana. Young people, I know them still, they will, it's invisible, it's more invisible. Young folk don't go to high school and drink at 9 o'clock in the morning and spend their whole day drinking at school. That doesn't happen. But plenty of young people go to school and smoke marijuana all day. And it does have a huge effect on their brains, I believe that strongly. And so it's not about us grown-ups. Go ahead, smoke pot all day, who cares? But it's about the young folk and what it does to their lives. And I don't think that should be lightly, just tossed aside. Because, yeah, they might not be dying, but there might be many more of them who are sort of wrecking their lives in another way. And so I don't think that should be taken lightly at all. And I'm not against the sale of it at all, but I just think it should be noted that, yeah, it might become so normal in our world if there's a place to buy it right down the road, that kids start to think, oh, it's totally cool to smoke pot, it's no big deal.
Don't think a cannabis business would be accretive, as existing traditional good businesses will predictably flee from neighboring businesses that are incompatible with their brand. Those empty storefronts will create a vacuum that will be filled by less attractive kinds of businesses. And just because a business is legal doesn't mean that every Skid Row business is appropriate for every town, particularly for a town such as Ridgefield, that is family-oriented, academically rigorous in its schools, that is spiritually robust, intellectually curious, culturally dynamic, and where the development and conservation and preservation thrive in harmony. What towns are more suited for the cannabis business? This is another kind of map showing the relative socioeconomic relationship of the 46 towns in Connecticut with a qualifying population of 25,000 or more. Median household incomes range from $36,000 to $206,000 from left to right on the horizontal axis, and the percent of adults with a bachelor's degree or higher range from 16% to 78% from the bottom to the top of the vertical axis. These two metrics are highly correlated with a coefficient of 0.87 for the statisticians. 12 of the 13 towns that have approved cannabis zoning cluster in the lower left, or less affluent and less educated towns. West Hartford is the lone outlier. 9 of these qualifying towns, including Ridgefield, have approved moratoriums spanning the socioeconomic range of towns. The 5 qualifying towns that have chosen to prohibit cannabis are generally more affluent and well-educated. Ridgefield's closest peers, Westport and Greenwich, have said no to recreational adult cannabis. There are 12 other towns with populations less than 25,000 that have prohibited cannabis, including New Canaan and Weston, and Wilton remains under a moratorium. Fortunately, this legislation gives Ridgefield an escape hatch by empowering local elected officials, either by means of zoning regulations or an ordinance, or both, to opt out of this, which began the process that seems to have sent this political hot potato into a ping-pong match that has culminated in a parallel path of both a revised zoning regulation submitted on June 9th and a town ordinance proposed by the Board of Selectmen on June the 15th.
Kurt Carr, 62 Prospect Ridge. I see on your agenda tonight the ordinance, the cannabis ordinance.
Yes.
And I think we have another option that you should consider. Submitted an application to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a change in zoning regulations to prohibit cannabis consistent with the policy passed by the Board of Selectmen. Right. We believe that this is a friendly amendment proposal that we hope you will embrace, and instead of going forward with an ordinance, add your support to this. It is consistent with what you requested of the Planning and Zoning Commission. You had 3 public hearings or 3 information sessions.
Right.
It would still require them to have a public hearing. Yes. They received the application yesterday, last evening officially. They have 65 days to hold a public hearing. This will be much less divisive than an ordinance. You've done your due diligence. You've had your vote. It's now their turn. They can't keep sending it back to you. It's time for them to stand up and be counted. So I hope you will consider this as a superior option. You still later can do the ordinance. There's nothing saying that you later on can't come back with an ordinance. But the ball should be in the Planning and Zoning court, which is where you said it. So.
And the next 4B has to do with the cannabis ordinance. We heard Mr. Carr's comments prior to that we should hold off and allow the P&Z to move forward. and run its course. I have spoken with the chair of planning and zoning. The expiration on the moratorium is September 24th. They voted for 1 year, but I do believe they could vote to address it earlier if they wanted to. I don't know where it's going to go, how long that process would take for regulation change with public hearings, and they are off in August. But I think I can safely say that there are people on both sides of the question, yes or no, and that
But by not
the
having-
reason, just let me
Go ahead,
finish,
sir.
that the reason that I brought it forward to begin with, if you recall, I went to the planning and zoning,
Right.
expecting them to motion and second, which they did, based on the Board of Selectmen's vote.
Right.
And it ended up failing 5-4. Was it 5?
No, they tabled it. They tabled it.
They tabled it.
And then they
To
continued
wait
it.
for council opinion. And I don't know what happened after
They got council's opinion. And I think because of the ordinance, they said, well, gee, if you're gonna do an ordinance, we don't want to confuse things by having these two things go in parallel. So the ordinance was used.
I appreciate that opinion, but my gut tells me otherwise.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
My discussions
right
lead me to believe that something will be approved potentially. That there'll be a great debate, it'll be back and forth, and that it may not be denied completely, that some form may be, because there are people that do support it.
To support
the sale of
The
cannabis.
sale of cannabis, that's the question.
So I think that was the reason why we decided to go with the ordinance, so we didn't have to put the town at risk of them approving.
Exactly right.
Right. And
because an ordinance, they can't override the ordinance.
Right. It would also seem to me that even if they are going to consider it, we should be advancing in parallel, because September 24th is the end of the moratorium, and we can't rely on P&Z having, even if they give...
Meeting the deadlines.
Yeah.
Right, they've also indicated that they would extend the moratorium if they needed to, so that's subject to them agreeing to it.
They can do that now.
Right.
They have
And your argument is to have them make their...
land use, right.
Right, it's a land use decision. They now have an amendment. They have an application. They can't do what they did with. They can't table that. They have to have a public hearing, and then they have to vote on it. And so the issue is going to be forced. Where before, I mean, I would have thought that your vote.
Your application is to
modify the regulation.
Modify the regulation.
It's to basically replace 7.13 and I think 2.2 something. 2.2 is the definitions, 7.13 to conform with the new law, to reflect the new cannabis law.
Policy of the Board of Selectmen.
And the policy of the Board of Selectmen. But Havel, I mean, they currently have a regulation that prohibits both medical and recreational cannabis, which
I don't see the recreational. It's definitely.
It's in there. It's in there.
Medical.
It's in there. I promise you.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
It's in there. I promise you, it's in. In fact, if you look in there, it's lined out of some of that in what you've got in that file. But item 2 is also prohibiting recreational cannabis. But there's some question about whether that would hold up after the micro cultivator, the 14 or 11, whatever the number is, so that they would need to be more specific to the new state statute. And the proposed amendment, the application, basically uses what New Canaan did. Basically takes New Canaan's regulation, changes it to Ridgefield. So it's been vetted by the attorneys for New Canaan, and clearly our attorney should probably also vet it. But it's a pretty simple
In my capacity, I agree, I understand exactly what you're saying. My concern is that the end result will not be what the overwhelming consensus is of the Board of Selectmen at this point. We have been asked to give an opinion, and that P&Z referred it back to us for policy. We set the policy. It's not been adhered to. There was a motion put and a second, and they decided to table it. It hasn't come back, and that concerns me. And I think it concerns a majority of the people in this town, and that's why we would move forward with an ordinance.
Well, the reason that they got the two people to withdraw their motion was because of the ordinance. That was when they,
All the more reason to continue with it.
That's fine then. I mean, as long as you understand that you're going to have a parallel process going on here, and some people think that's confusing, and that's fine.
But I feel like if there's an ordinance, right?
Right.
That's going to supersede everything. And
Right.
And if we pass an ordinance, it's a law of the town.
Right.
That they can't
Supersede.
preempt. Yeah. I personally would have hoped, I'll speak for myself, that when the Board of Selectmen voted to establish a policy as requested by, whether the policy was to approve or not approve, but they did feel that the Board of Selectmen is responsible for the setting of policy in the town of Ridgefield, and that the issue of cannabis sales is a policy for the town that should be determined first by the Board of Selectmen. We voted to set a policy.
Yeah.
We went over to planning and zoning. I attended the meeting. I explained it to them. The vote last night was to table, and as Mr. Carr just said, now they're waiting because they tabled it. I suggested to the Board of Selectmen that we perhaps may want to pursue a full ordinance and not just a policy, because legally, planning and zoning does not have to follow town policy. So we'll actually do two public hearings, July 13th, it would be, I wrote the 17th.
And August 17th.
August 17th with a town meeting on September 7th.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'll have a motion to entertain that the Board of Selectmen set 2 dates for a public hearing of July 13th and August 17th with a town meeting on September 7th for the purpose of passing, or for the purpose of enacting a cannabis ordinance in the town of Ridgefield, prohibiting.
I'll make the motion. As stated.
And I'll second.
So we have a motion made and seconded, Bob and Barbara. Any further debate? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0.
Rob Hendrick joins the discussion, arriving a little later.
Just out of curiosity, what happens if the moratorium lapses? Right, so, again, probably you'll take care of that, it's probably not an issue, but if it did in fact lapse, what's the worst case scenario? What could happen?
I think there's probably two ways to answer that. So, first of all, from the state perspective, the state has to license these businesses, and so the state may or may not license a business within Ridgefield. We can't control the state licensing process, but in terms of Ridgefield regulations, actually it was Mr. Carr, I have to give him credit, that spotted a very small subset of our medical marijuana regulation actually does prohibit.
You're right.
I can't be wrong about everything.
Yeah, and we didn't discuss this, by the way, when we did our moratorium.
Because I didn't see it.
There is language, very, very a bit buried, but it's in the medical marijuana section that prohibits the, I believe the words are the growth and distribution, I believe are the words.
Or dispensing.
Or dispensing, thank you. Growth and dispensing of marijuana. These words are important.
I think it's recreational. I think it says recreational.
It just says marijuana, I believe, in Ridgefield. Now, I've talked to Mr. Beecher. This is one of the three things that we asked Tom Beecher in the few weeks when we sort of needed to pull back and just understand what they thought.
So I talked to Mr. Beecher about, well, how does that regulation either help or hinder? How does it interpret it under the new regulations? Because our regulation was written a long time ago. It wasn't actually that long ago, but it was just long enough ago that it's not written with the current statute in mind.
Right.
So the answer from Mr. Beecher was that it would be good for us to rewrite. Basically, that regulation is interesting, but it's probably causing more question marks than answers for us going forward. So to answer your question, Sean, we think it's appropriate to either extend the moratorium and or pass a regulation to make things clear.
Okay.
And Planning and Zoning Commission has every intention of doing that. And we're happy to take on the issue, but we don't think it's appropriate to take on the issue and kind of get the public all drummed up at the same time that you're trying to do an ordinance.
Our curiosity is in the Board of Selectmen establishing a policy, which we were asked to do. The Planning and Zoning Commission seemed not 100% sure about that. Was there a reason or discussion about that?
I think the original reaction to the question was, is this policy conclusive? Does this mean, by virtue of you voting on policy, is that enforceable in some way? And
well, it's a policy, but it does not a policy does not preclude a Planning and Zoning Commission for establishing a regulation.
Right. So, as you,
ordinance does.
Exactly. If you voted for your policy, and to Mr. Connolly's point, if you had your policy in place and we let the moratorium expire, then as a community we're collectively in an ambiguous legal spot. Because you do have this policy, but we don't have an ordinance and we don't have a regulation. Right. And the statute says that you need either an ordinance or regulation to ban.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you for popping in.
I'm sorry, I meant to be here about 40 minutes earlier, but I have to leave.
Mr. Marconi?
Yes.
The exact language, this is in 7.13B2. Dispensing and growing of recreational marijuana is also prohibited within the town of Ridgefield and shall not be permitted unless expressly authorized in these regulations.
Right. Okay.
And it's the dispensing and growing marijuana. It's those three words that.
Well, recreational also, recreational marijuana.
But it's not.
And that will survive after the moratorium. The question is, would it prevent it if somebody brought in an application for a micro cultivator or something? Right. Could they do that?
And the advice of counsel is that we would likely face a legal challenge.
I've always been told that zoning is from the date of passage forward, but an ordinance is a law that covers anything that pre-existed as well, would be under the law.
So even a non-conforming pre-existing
use of marijuana, if we passed a law saying it's illegal in the town of Ridgefield, absolutely. And we ran into this, if you recall, when we had the issue of the horses in downtown.
Yes.
And from a zoning perspective, they could not stop that person because of those pre-existing.
Right.
If they passed a regulation, it would be going forward. We passed the ordinance because it would cause that particular situation to have to cease. That was the only way we could do it.
I learned something. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, we both did. Yeah. So, thank you, Rob. Appreciate you being here, Mr. Hendrick.
It's hard to believe that as recently as June 15th, neither the first selectman nor the planning and zoning chair still were this unfamiliar with the existing regulation. So in addition to the public hearing this evening, the Board of Selectmen is in the process of conducting their fourth and fifth public hearing to be followed by a town meeting on September the 7th. During the fourth public hearing on July 13th, former chair of the Economic and Community Development Commission made the case favoring cannabis businesses in Ridgefield.
I know that you all the board has been against allowing the sale of marijuana in the town of Ridgefield. And I know that you had some hearings and then voted against it, and now we're pushing this. And I think it's very short-sighted. I think 2 and 3 years down the road, when you're looking for an extra $1 million or $2 in your budget, I think you're going to say, well, we gave up that medical marijuana taxes and economic development, but At least we don't have any prostitutes on the streets.
And was followed by the current ECDC chair, Glory Norwitt.
To continue on with what Jeffrey Morris was saying, he's an Economic and Community Development Commission with me, and as you know, the ECDC made a statement saying that we believe economic development should really be considered more thoroughly here. And even if the Board of Selectmen doesn't want to have retail sales, there are so many other types of businesses related to marijuana, such as the growing, the cultivating, and we're disallowing everything. When it seems like what people are really, if anyone's concerned about this, it's really just about retail sales, and we are blanketly saying we can't have anything. And this should be a consideration in economic development.
Thank you.
Though they make this sound like an official position of the ECDC, when pressed by the first selectman, this is their response.
I don't know, we never received a vote from, did you vote, ECDC? Did the ECDC vote?
I'm trying to remember to tell you the truth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead, Mr. Carr.
We have no voting authority without recommendation.
Go ahead.
These are not the official ECDC positions, and these two arguments together are incoherent, as the only opportunity for the town to collect the revenue Mr. Morris promises is through local retail sales taxes on sales at dispensaries that Ms. Norwitt would prohibit. This self-contradictory argument is a shell game. When arguments are this incoherent, they usually are symptomatic of a hidden agenda. Well, I won't speculate on their hidden agenda if they have one. The question is, why so far has no one just admitted that they are a marijuana addict and just want the convenience of a local dispensary? For one simple reason: pot is still socially unacceptable. Before the commission finalized its referral list on this application on July 26, Alice Dew had sent referral letters to the police chief and health department director. As of August 12th, only 2 of these referral letters have been filed with the land use office to the Board of Selectmen and to the ECDC. One is expected to also go to the Board of Finance. With the possible exception of the ECDC, which has never officially taken a vote on the question, the only 2 responses received are unanimously in support of the amended regulation. Police Chief Jeff Kreitz cryptically responded, "Definitely the correct move." Ridgefield Health Director Ed Briggs supports banning marijuana stores in town because marijuana use increases mental health issues such as depression and psychosis and memory loss in young adults. Colorado has experienced an increase in crime, traffic accidents, emergency room visits, and hospitalizations. Mr. Briggs is particularly concerned with edibles containing THC that cause enhanced effects and can easily get in the hands of children. He urges the commission to do its job and not to allow these stores in Ridgefield. On August the 8th, Rob Hendricks sent a referral letter regarding the application to the ECDC and the Board of Selectmen. That is 62 days after the commission received the application and just 8 days before opening the public hearing, and 15 weeks after having received this letter from the Board of Selectmen. Clearly, the Board of Selectmen stated plainly the town policy prohibits all cannabis businesses. The only thing that has changed is that in reaction to the commission's non-action, the town is now moving through a parallel process to transform this policy into an ordinance. Can this application simply be tabled while the ordinance is in process? Not according to statute 8-7D as reflected in Ridgefield zoning regulations. Once the application was officially accepted on June 14th, the commission has 65 days to open the public hearing. That would be no later than August 18th, hence the special meeting tonight, August 16th. From the opening of the public hearing, the commission has 35 days to complete the public hearing, which takes it to September 20. The next meeting within that range is September 13. If you open and close the hearing tonight, You have 65 days to render a decision by October 20. And if you delay until the next meeting on September 13th to close the public hearing, you will have a hard stop on November 17th. Only the applicant has the option of consenting to extensions, not more than a total of 65 days. Ridgefield is speeding dangerously to the end of the road when the current moratorium expires on September 24th. And even if you extend another 90 days, that means a decision still has to be made sooner or later. What is the virtue of further delay? The time has come for the Commission to stop and fulfill its oath of office, to close this public hearing tonight, and to pass A-22-1. Do you think that inaction and indecision will keep both sides of this issue happy? Instead, history teaches that washing your hands of the issue within the scope of your authority and turning it back to the public to do your job is ultimately disappointing everyone. Delay, when swift and decisive action is needed, not only costs lives but destroys reputations earned over decades of public service. If the town can't control our FOMO, fear of missing out, how on earth can we expect our kids to? There is simply no more time left to squander. Please close this public hearing and put a proper end to this by approving this application tonight. If you wait until September 13 after the town meeting on September 7, or allow this application to pass by default on or before November 17th, you will only undermine planning and zoning's authority, credibility, and relevance. You were not elected to sidestep contentious issues and to send them to a referendum or to a town meeting. Here are the top 12 reasons to approve this application tonight. A pot shop is demographically and culturally incompatible with Ridgefield and will drive out good business, creating a vacuum that attracts other kinds of Skid Row businesses. Today's THC potency is excessive and addictive, producing psychosis and depression. Because of confiscatory taxes, the legal cannabis business is unsustainable, corrupting the legal cannabis space and fueling the illicit market, resulting in unrestrained sales of pot to kids. The social and economic costs dwarf the tax revenues that go mostly to the state, while the costs stay with the community. This application merely updates an existing Ridgefield zoning regulation that banned both medical and recreational marijuana in 2015. The reasons given by the Commission in 2015 are just as valid in 2022 as they were then. The referrals are unanimously supportive of this application. When the Commission asked for guidance from the Board of Selectmen, the Selectmen fully expected you to follow the town's policy to ban cannabis businesses, and they are perplexed by the Commission's failure to act. And the number one reason is because this is the job you chose to run for and you were elected to do. This is your opportunity to salvage the Commission's authority, relevance, and reputation by updating an existing, outdated regulation. The reputation that the Commission has burnished over decades of public service and well-crafted regulation and fair enforcement is at a crossroads, and it is your job to make a fateful decision. Please close this public hearing tonight and approve A-22-1 tonight. Thank you for your attention.